Okay, everybody, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today we have another cool kind of review slash comparison for you from the brand Seiko. But this time we're going to be on the opposite end of their spectrum in their really entry-level essentials collection. Now, a little bit about the brand. Seiko was founded back in 1888. They are Japanese in origin and now have factories throughout Asia. They cover all market segments from entry-level to high-end. Now, this type of watch you could probably consider as an everyday watch. And when you're looking for an everyday watch, of course, some key common characteristics in design language are going to be, you're going to want that versatile blend of sporty and dressy attributes. Now, although these watches look quite dressy, they also have looms, so that adds a little bit of sportiness to that. Now, these are part, again, of the Essentials line. This is the SUR309 and the SUR317. And essentially, they're super affordable and decently equipped models for both the casual buyer and enthusiast. And they're infused with, Seiko's signature design language, which I think is pretty cool. Now, I actually found these pieces on Jomashop, and they have, these were both under 150 bucks, even under $140. So, and then they also even have different dial configurations as well. I figured the blue to blue would be a good comparison. And the nice thing is here you're seeing that they're actually two very different types of blue dials. A lot of that does have to do with the lighting, but once I get these in hand and kind of show you how the dials transition in the light, you're going to notice the different type of execution. But all in all, this is kind of the other side of Seiko that a lot of people don't really think about these days anymore. They just think about some of the higher, upper market, upper tier stuff that's been coming out, being really excited about it. But Seiko still makes stuff like this. And I have to say, I'm still impressed. I mean, these are nice little quartz watches that are super cheap. And they have some cool size choices. You got a 40 millimeter versus a 36 millimeter. And so I'm going to show you guys how those wear, how they compare and contrast as far as dimensions go as well. But let's go ahead and get these pieces in hand for a closer. All right, guys. So as you can see, very different, but very similar. Essentially, one is the 36 millimeter, kind of considered the unisex. Well, then you have the more definite men's model at the 40 millimeter mark. And as you can see on the 40 millimeter, you actually have more of your traditional blue sunray dial, but on the 36, it's actually more of kind of this cool transitional, more like I'd compare this to something like I guess you could say a nail polish finish or a metallic paint finish. So there's not really a direction that it shifts. It actually just shifts with the light depending on the situation. As you can see here, very dark when there's nothing there, but then it actually will absorb and reflect the light in some really cool, interesting ways that you're going to really notice when we do the actual comparison during that low light transition portion of the segment. So anyways, I found these pieces on Jomashop, guys, and the thing is, as much flack as Jomashop seems to get online, there's still plenty of people that buy from them, and I'm one of them. Through the lifetime of my channel, I've bought tons of watches from Jomashop, honestly, you can't argue with the pricing, guys. These are really easy for me to get onto the channel and share with you guys, and I think they're ones that could probably fit in a lot of your collections very easily. Obviously, the 36 for people with smaller wrists, and then the 40 for people with kind of that more medium to large size wrist, I think will actually look really good. I'm probably going to end up gifting this one to my son, although I'm sure my wife would have enjoyed wearing it. But I think my older son would enjoy this a lot. And plus, it has a sapphire crystal, which I think is great. So these are sapphire equipped watches, and as you can see, they actually have some pretty decent action on these quartz movements. They're hitting those tick marks relatively well. You can see this isn't like your typical Timex tick there where they're just all over the place. These are pretty well dialed in, well tuned quartz movements. So really impressive from that standpoint. As you can see, it's really all hollow. Everything, everything is a bit faux for show. Coming to to the bracelet. It's hollow. It actually uses a really interesting little tool though on these. It's not really a pin and collar. It's almost like a pin, but then the collar is a spring, essentially, and it's actually super easy to use. Basically, you push this in, it pops it out, and then when you're putting it back in, you can kind of use this to push it back in flush, and then you set it perfectly centered by actually hitting it with the short end. So I thought that was really cool and thought I'd share that with you. I think it's kind of awesome that even although, you know, people are very concerned with Seiko's upper tier stuff, they're still doing stuff for their entry level. Like, this is very entry level and very much, you know, again, a casual watch fan could see this at like a Macy's or something and think, wow, that's a nice watch. I'm going to go buy that, right? And they might not know anything about watches. So I think that's kind of the interesting thing about Seiko is depending on where you are within your Seiko journey, you could think that Seiko is actually an expensive department store brand, right? Or you could think that Seiko is actually just a super cheap mid-tier watch, or you can think that there's some aspirational grail type watch. So I think that's what's really, for me, one of the things that I find most interesting about Seiko that's very different about them and other brands. And as you can see here, guys, when you have them side by side, the 36 does look quite small. It has 18 millimeter lug versus a 20 millimeter lug width here. And then the thickness, though, is actually, they're pretty much the same. They both come in right about 8.5 millimeters thick. Here you have a 46.8 millimeter lug to lug versus a 41.8 millimeter lug to lug. That's really what's going to help these play very, very different on wrist. That and the lug width. I think a 36 with a 20 millimeter lug width would probably you know, look a bit more, I guess, more butch and more manly. But this with the 18 millimeter is definitely going to be for more petite wrists. Even if you like smaller watches, chances are, because of the proportions, right? Even though the scale might be to your liking, the proportions are probably going to end up feeling a bit small and undersized. Now, these have a very signature Seiko look to them. I almost consider them, right? Like, you've always heard of Grand Seikos. These aren't Grand Seikos, but I think these are kind of like, yeah, I'm sorry, baby Grand Seikos, right? Like, everything wants to be a baby Grand Seiko. But let me whip out a kind of another watch here that has some very, very similar, essentially some similar design language that's considered the baby Grand Seiko. Oh, see, sorry, let me grab that there. We have this limited edition SJE073, and of course everything's milled out, Dia shield coated, you know, fancy dial, all that stuff. But when you look at these, they're both 40 millimeter watches, both from Seiko. Look at that, the way that they did the indices, right? You see the doubles at the 12, the 3, the 6, the 9. You get those kind of double bar, then you get the singles in between. You have that framed date window there with the 13th for today. And then you have very similar, you know, kind of alpha-ish handsets there. So, and then, of course, the branding, right? Seiko. Of course, one is... Actually, I think they're both applied, which is kind of nice. Here, let me take a close... Yeah, actually, they're both applied. You know, one is, you know, applied quite flat, but still appears, to my eye, applied. And then this one is definitely a lot more three-dimensional, of course, with that textured dial, that kind of washi paper / window frosted dial. So they do have a lot in common. Even when you look at the bracelets, you know, of course, here more of the faux kind of center link there with the you know, with the polished portions. But yeah, this is not a baby Grand Seiko, but I'd consider it maybe a baby Presage. It definitely has a lot of that same design language, and to a certain point it's even a little bit cleaner and a little bit sportier because it has lume, right? So that was pretty cool. So let me go ahead, get this off of camera here, and really just kind of focus in on these bad boys. I gotta say, I'm very impressed with these. I was kind of expecting like, okay, cool, we'll just kind of bring these on the channel, take a look, compare. I think even if you don't like the style of watch, you're probably going to get some value out of looking at this, because you're going to be able to see the comparison between a 40mm watch and a 36mm watch. Smaller watches are coming back into style, guys. You're going to hear a lot of people push 36mm and below, you know, for men's watches. A lot of those people have really small wrists, okay? I'm not one of those people. I have a 7¼ inch wrist, which is on probably the larger side of a medium-sized wrist. And I'm pretty ham-fisted when it comes to my hand. So something like this looks really, really small, which we'll see when we actually get these pieces on wrist. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, guys, as you can see on my 7¼ inch wrist, the 40mm wears just fine. You get a little close, and it might seem a little bit large, but it's relatively manageable. And honestly, on wrist, so many of these fine details stick out. Guys, look at that polished bevel on the case. That's outstanding. And this is like a $139 watch. So really, really nice. I mean, you don't even kind of, you know, some of the cheaper shortcuts that they took on the bracelet even blend away. You know, it's still going to be obviously a very comfortable bracelet, but looks wise, you know, as it's rolling on the wrist, you got to admit this thing looks really good. Also, it's quite thin because it is a quartz watch. But then when we move over to the 36, I did actually put this a little bit lower on my wrist bone, just so that it would look a little bit more proportional. The higher up they are on the wrist, you can see I wore this a little higher up, so it actually makes it appear a little bit smaller. You know, although considering 40mm for this type of watch is actually kind of on the larger side. Preferably you'd be somewhere like a 38.5, at least for me. That's kind of my sweet spot. But if I wear this a little bit closer to my hand, I actually can use that illusion. So that's another little fun thing we can do in the video, is the illusion of it actually being a little bit larger and just proportionally a little bit nicer. And then you get a little bit close, of course, and some of you might be thinking, hey, that doesn't actually look that bad. You know, especially when you get up close like this and there's some lens distortion added. I have it a little bit closer to my hand, further down my wrist. It really wears well, guys. I mean, you can see here, again, similar traits there. Look at that case. Look at that beveling. For the price, come on, all in-house. That's pretty crazy. Sapphire crystal, so you don't have to worry about it getting scratched up. Not that I ever really worry too much about hard lacs, but it's something to kind of keep in mind, guys. You know, for those of you that are crying out for sapphire on entry-level Seikos, they're here, guys. You just have to remember that they have now a global pricing scheme, essentially, that is going to cover a lot of different models, including quartz models that end up in department store shelves, right, or in dealers' windows. You know, and part of that is, yeah, some people like quartz and they want a sapphire watch. They don't mind things being hollow. They just want something that looks pretty good. And man, guys, this does look pretty good. I mean, tell me in the comments below if you're looking at this and just thinking yuck, because I gotta say, man, if I didn't know, you know, if it wasn't for, you know, my own kind of preconceived ideas of, okay, I like mechanical movements versus quartz and that side of it, I would probably just be enamored with this thing. I mean, if this had the movement that's in my SJE, a 6L movement in it, got that, you know, higher beat, that 4 hertz, 8 ticks a second sweep that's super smooth, I think that'd be really lovely on this bad boy. It's a good looking timepiece, and it's thin, and look at that bevel. It's not the sharpest bevel I've ever seen, guys, but come on, for the price, that's pretty nuts, I gotta say. So really nice. They were really great on the wrist. You know, again, everything's pretty hollow in general, but I think it works pretty good. Inside, ticking away here. If you didn't catch the initial kind of sweep of the specs there across the screen in the beginning, inside here we have the Seiko Quartz 6N52, so really nice from that standpoint. Of course, you do have applied indices. You have these really cool blue dials. One is a sunray, one's a kind of a more of a metallic dial. As you can see, the way the light hits it, it just captures it and soaks it in. and then you get to the dark side and it's just like, whoa, this thing is pretty much black. So a really different transition there versus here, when you're going to get, as you can see, more of that kind of pie cutout, typical sunray transition, where here you're going to kind of get that half, that gradation, that kind of fade dial, which I think is actually really cool and interesting, and almost like, I can't believe, especially on the camera, but it's mostly the lighting of how blue this thing is getting when the light hits it at the right angle. And then just really just, man, look at that though. That's, I'd say this is probably a little bit closer to reality about how this is, you're going to perceive this watch in person. It's not going to be super lit up like this. It's going to be more so in this range here, which you guys will notice when we get to the low light transition and loom. So let's actually set that up right now. All right, guys, we'll go ahead and hit the lights here. As you can see, Seiko Luma Bright, it works even in this really interesting, very dressy application. You can see those loom plots shine through really, really well. So you're still going to be able to read this in the dark. But one thing I do like to set up in you know, the kind of the space of the loom shot is the low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field, you know, out in direct sunlight outdoors. Sometimes you're going to be in transitional lighting, coming in and out of a building, in and out of a vehicle. Ooh, look at the way the light treats those dials totally differently. And also you can see the way that the light plays off of the brushing on the bracelets and on the case and the polish there. You can see it's quite uniform, so, you know, very decent finishing from that standpoint, but obviously very tinny in execution and feeling. Guys, look at this dial. Look at that 36 millimeter dial. Look at the way the light transitions off of that. It's just that gradient dial. Boom, that thing is just blowing up the color. Then you can get like kind of the half. You can see kind of the rise and the fall of it. But then when you compare that to the 40 millimeter dial, you're going to get that high contrast, that very vibrant blue sun ray just kind of peeking around, spinning around the dial, and then most of the dial is going to be dark. And it's going to be more of kind of that pie cutout, where you're going to get very, very high contrast, of course, between the light and the dark, versus here you can get something that's totally vibrant in blue, and then you can get something that's totally on the darker side on this dial. So really special, and I'm really glad that they're different, because it gives you something else to consider. Not just the size. Now you got to think about the dials, right? So if you have a smaller wrist, this little 36 millimeter watch is pretty cool. I got to say, I'm very, very impressed with it. I love the way it looks, the way it renders in different lighting, guys. I can't get over that. So just let's enjoy this for a little bit. It's a good look. That is a good look. All right, guys, so closing thoughts. All right, on the wrist, very classic wear, of course, super light, but still very well balanced. As far as model variations go, they have black dials, silver dial options are also available. So definitely check the links in the description there for good prices, and also to just kind of see what's out there. As far as comparable models go, I guess you could kind of compare these to some of those nicer steel Timex models. But honestly, even the nicer like Todd Snyder Timexes are still not going to have you know, sapphire crystals. They're not going to be having in-house movements, quote unquote, or anything like that typically. Actually, no, I think some of the Timex movements, they might have some in-house quartz movements at this price point. But the ticks are definitely going to be all over the place. Here you can see these, well, it's a little of an odd angle, so maybe not the best time to look down at the dial and see that they're hitting, because it is a little offset. But I can assure you guys, these are hitting pretty well, and they're obviously quite accurate. They're quartz, but they're not, they're cheap quartz, don't get me wrong, but they're Seiko's cheap quartz. So, you know, their tolerances are still pretty nice. I didn't see anything listed, but oh, okay. Well, really quick, guys, just to reiterate, We also do have 100 meters of water resistance on these, which is nice. It definitely adds to that sporty feel. No, they're not screw down crowns. They're not signed or anything like that. But get rained on, rinse it off with water, whatever. If it gets kind of muggy and gross, you can do that with a 100-meter resistant watch. Obviously, I wouldn't want to submerge it or anything like that. But you should be okay to treat this thing within your everyday rhythm, as long as you're not doing too hardcore of a water sport. So that's really nice. Again, as far as the comparables go, I think these are really standouts within this price point. From Seiko, they go for $250 and $235. You get them from a dealer like Jomashop, and you're looking at $139 and $137. So insane pricing. I mean, perfect for dads and grads, right? So I can totally get the small one for my son, and then, maybe Father's Day rolls around. If somebody wanted to get me something, it could be something like this. I mean, of course I already own it, but this is something that even I could buy as a gift, and you can kind of fire and forget. You don't have to worry about them winding the watch and understand caring about the nuances of mechanical movement, and you don't have to worry about them banging up the crystal too bad because it's sapphire, right? And then ultimately you got a 20 millimeter lug width and an 18 millimeter lug width, so these are, those aren't odd numbers. You're going to be able to put them on NATOs, you're going to be able to put them on, all types of different straps, and these things are going to be monsters. And really the worst thing about the watch is the bracelet, which kind of melts away when you're not paying attention to it. As a reviewer, of course, I'm paying a little bit of extra attention to it. But I mean, imagine, that on one of these little crown and buckle numbers. Look at that. Imagine a little bit of this action on there. I mean, there's so many sleek combos that could be utilized on here, guys. Like, look, that's come on. $139, guys, for everybody that's just crying about Seiko costing too much. Hey, there's still plenty of good cheap Seikos out there, and this is a great example of them. So bottom line, guys, these really have the makings of absolute strap monsters at a truly entry-level price point. There's no stretching of entry-level on these. This is an entry-level price point, under 150 bucks. I mean, you can buy freaking fashion watches for this much, and these are way better than your average fashion watch when it comes to build, materials, heritage, everything. I mean, these pretty much have them beat in every category that you can measure. So, oh yeah, and you're getting a sapphire crystal. Come on, it's for additional protection and longevity. Even if you don't care about a sapphire crystal, still something nice to have. So with all that said, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you liked the video, please do it like. And if you haven't, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.